Hi there. Welcome to Cats in the City, by Sith Sense. I'm Johnny.
And I'm Pearl.
Together, we would like to share with you pieces of interesting knowledge that we find.
And that could be useful to you in the future.
Pearl, let's make another game today in Python.
Okay, what game do you have in mind?
Mastermind Game. Are you familiar with this game?
Yes, Johnny, I know this game. It's a code-breaking game between two players, where one player is the code maker and the other is the code breaker.
It is a code-breaking game invented by Mordecai Meirowitz in 1970. The game has gained worldwide popularity and has become a classic board game.
The game typically involves colored pegs or other symbols, and the code breaker receives feedback in the form of clues to help them refine their guesses. The game is often used as a tool for developing logic and problem-solving skills.
It's one of the best game to code to improve our coding skills in Python. In this video, we'll write a program that will play the game as the code maker, while our user will be the code breaker.
Our game will create a secret code of 4 letters, chosen from a list of 6 alphabets. The alphabets are A, B, C, D, E and F.
Duplicates are allowed in the code and code breaker has 10 tries only.
To win the game, the code breaker must guess the exact combination of letters in the secret code, with each letter in the correct position.
If the guess submitted by the code breaker is wrong, the code maker will provide feedback after each guess, indicating how many of the letters in the guess are correct, and how many of them are in the correct position.
Now let's go through our Python code. Remember the random module from our number guessing game? We'll need to use the random module too in this game. To do that, we'll import the random module.
In Python, it is a convention to declare constants after the import block. The names of constant variables are usually written in capital letters, to indicate that they are not meant to be changed during the program's execution. By using capital letters, the constants are easily distinguished from variables, which can help make the code more readable and less prone to errors.
The constant variables are quite self-explanatory, but we'll go through them nonetheless. Code choices are the alphabets allowed in our Mastermind game. There are only 6 alphabets and other alphabets are not allowed.
We have set the length of the secret code to be 4, and the maximum number of guesses allowed for the code breaker is 10. These criteria are represented in our program by the variables, code length, and max tries, respectively. By defining these variables, we can easily adjust the length of the code and the number of tries allowed, without having to modify the code elsewhere in the program.
After that, we will create several functions that will be used in our Mastermind program. You may have noticed that in our previous videos, where we created iterative calculators, we did not create any functions. However, in most Python programming, creating functions is the norm as it helps to organize the code and make it more modular. The reason we did not create any functions in the calculator programs is because they are simple mini programs. In contrast, the Mastermind game requires more complex and numerous tasks, which makes creating functions essential.
The first function we will create is responsible for generating the secret code. We start with an empty list called generated code, and then randomly choose letters from the code choices list, one by one, and append them to the list using the append method. This process continues until the length of the generated code matches the desired code length. We accomplish this by using a while loop.
The second function is responsible for asking the code breaker to input their guess. As a best practice, we should always verify and validate user input to ensure it is correct and to prevent errors. To accomplish this, we will use a while loop to continuously ask the code breaker for a valid input. Before we do that, did you notice that we have used a few new methods along with the input method?
The upper and strip methods are both examples of string methods. These methods work on string data, which in our case is the input from the code breaker. The upper method will capitalize all the alphabets in the input string, while the strip method will remove any leading or trailing white space from the input. It is important to remember that in Python, String data is case sensitive and whitespace is also considered a character.
The code breaker's input will be stored in the guess variable as a string. However, since the secret code is a list of 4 individual letters, we need to convert the string input into a list of 4 letters to compare it with the secret code.
To do this, we can use the list function, which converts a string into a list of its individual characters, like this. However, I see that you used a different function called list comprehension.
Both using a list comprehension and using the list function can achieve the same result of converting a string to a list of its individual characters. However, using a list comprehension can be more concise and efficient in terms of performance.
Yes, while the list function is more straightforward, using a list comprehension can be faster and more efficient, especially when dealing with large strings. This is because list comprehensions are evaluated in C, which is generally faster than using the list function in Python.
While there is a technical advantage to using list comprehension over the list function, my main reason for using it in this particular case is to introduce our audience to this powerful method. List comprehension is a versatile and useful tool in Python that can be used in many situations, and I believe it's important for our audience to become familiar with it.
List comprehension is a concise way of creating a list in Python. It consists of square brackets enclosing an expression, followed by a for loop and optional if statements. In terms of syntax, list comprehension is the most concise and Pythonic way to create a list. It combines the expression, loop, and optional condition into a single line of code.
List comprehension is a powerful tool that we'll be using more in the future. It's more efficient and versatile than the list function, and allows us to write concise code that is easier to read and understand. Think of it like a shorthand version of the for loop, which can be written in a single line instead of a block of code.
Moving on to our validation function, the first check we perform is on the length of the guess in list variable. As we know, the code is made up of 4 letters, so the length of the guess in list variable must also be 4. To ensure this, we use a conditional statement to compare the length of the guess in list with the code length variable. If the lengths do not match, we print a message to inform the code breaker of their mistake, and then use the continue keyword to restart the while loop, prompting them to enter a valid guess again.
In addition, we need to ensure that each individual letter in the guess in list variable is a valid choice from the code choices variable. We can do this by using a for loop to iterate through each character in guess in list, and then using an if statement to check if the character is in code choices. If the letter is not in code choices, we'll print an error message and use the break keyword to exit the for loop. Exiting the for loop will also cause the while loop to restart, prompting the code breaker to enter a valid guess again.
The last step in the validation function is to return the guess in list variable, which contains the validated input from the code breaker. The validation function is now complete and ready to be called by our main game function.
The validation function is complex and challenging. I recommend that you pause this video and study the function carefully, to fully comprehend it before moving on to the next function.
The next function is quite complicated as well. In this function, we will compare the guess input to the secret code. To win the game, the letters in the guess must be both correct and in the right position. We will track these two conditions using 2 variables, correct letter and right position.
Firstly, we'll use a for loop to find the correct letters in the right position. But before that, let's review how to access items in a list. To access a specific item in a list, you can use its index number within square brackets after the name of the list. The first item in a list has an index of 0, the second item has an index of 1, and so on. For more information and examples, you can visit the reference material on https://www.python/python_lists_access.asp.
We'll use a for loop to identify correct letters in the right position by checking the items at the same index position in both the guess and code lists. To do this, we'll use an if statement that compares the 2 items. If they match, we'll replace both items with 0 as a placeholder in the lists.
This is important because deleting an item from the list can change its length, causing an index out of range error. However, feel free to experiment with different methods to achieve the same outcome, or explore other strategies to accomplish this task.
And at the same time, if the items match, we'll also increment the right position variable by 1.
Before moving on to the second condition, we'll need to remove any occurrences of the number 0 from the guess list, if there are any. While it's technically possible to remove the number 0 from the code list, it's unnecessary. Can you think of why that is? I'll let you ponder on the reason.
We will use the list method count to count the occurrences of the number 0 in the list, and save it in the variable count 0. Then, we will use a while loop and the remove method to remove the number 0 from the list.
The remove method removes the first occurrence of the specified element from the list. After removing the number 0, we will update the count 0 variable and restart the while loop.
We'll use a for loop next, to determine if each item in the guess list appears in the code list. Since we have accounted for the correct letters appearing in the right position, any remaining letters in the guess list that appear in the code list must be the correct letters but in the wrong position.
We'll also remove the matching item from the code list using the remove method to prevent double counting. To illustrate this point, let's consider an example. Suppose there are 2 Bs in the guess list, but only 1 B in the code list. If we didn't remove the B from the code list after matching the first B, we would count the second B in the guess list as a second match, resulting in the clue, 2 correct letters in the wrong position. This would mislead the code breaker, so we need to remove the matched item from the code list, to avoid this double counting.
And finally, we'll also increment the correct letter variable by 1 if a match was found.
This function will return 2 variables, which contain the clues on the number of correct letters in the right position, and the number of correct letters in the wrong position.
Finally, we are ready to build our main program for the Mastermind game. We'll need to connect all our functions together, in a logical and coherent way to make our game work.
Firstly, we'll generate the secret code using the generate code function, and save the secret code in the real code variable.
Next, we'll keep track of the number of guess by our code breaker using the count of guess variable. It's initialized to 0.
We will use a while loop to allow the code breaker to keep making guesses, until either the code has been successfully broken, or the code breaker has exhausted all their available attempts.
The input from the code breaker will be saved in the guessed code variable, using the input guess function.
The next line of code is critical. We need to save the real code variable as a list called temp code, explicitly. This is because we will pass temp code to the compare code function, and that function will modify temp code. If we pass real code to the function, the secret code will be changed, which will cause the program to crash and make the game impossible to win.
This requirement is specific to our program because of the way we have structured it. However, once you become more proficient in coding, you can try out different approaches and logic to build the game. The beauty of coding this game lies in the fact that there are multiple ways to build it, as long as the game logic is sound.
Remember that when we call the compare code function, it returns 2 values. We'll save both of these values as variables position and letter. This is known as unpacking the values from a function that returns multiple values. It's important to note that the order of variables when unpacking must match the order in which the values were returned by the function. So always refer back to the original function, to ensure you're unpacking the values correctly.
The rest of the code is self-explanatory. However, it's worth noting that when the number of correct letters in the correct position is equal to the code length, it indicates that the code has been successfully broken. Understanding the logical reasoning behind this can make your Python code more efficient, as you won't need to explicitly write a winning condition.
And that's the end of our code. Congratulations! You have successfully built the Mastermind game in Python. Give yourself a pat on the back for a job well done. It's quite an achievement because this game is quite challenging to code.
Take some time to play and enjoy the game. Try to break the secret code a few times to fully understand the game, especially if you were not familiar with it in the beginning. The more you play, the easier it will be to grasp the code-breaking strategies.
After which, you can tweak the code a bit, here and there. The ultimate challenge would be to build the game completely from scratch, and using different approaches and logic. Don't get discouraged by the challenge, instead, relish the experience as an opportunity to improve your Python coding skills. Enjoy the process and good luck.
That's all from us this time. I'm Johnny.
And I'm Pearl.
Bringing you bits and pieces of interesting knowledge from cats in the city.
Thanks and see you next time.